He looked her up and down and decided she didn't belong. Pilot Randall Gates stood at the foot of a private jet, blocking the Evelyn James comm, composed, impeccably dressed, and asked who she was there to assist. Not if, not could, just assumed. But when they picked Evelyn James, they didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know she was the founder of a multi-million-dollar tech company, the sole owner of that jet, and a woman who had built her empire from the ground up, after being told she never would. What came next wasn't just justice, it was exposure. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one woman, it's about all of us. Sunlight glinted off the polished wing of the jet, painting bright lines across the tarmac. A soft wind rustled through the silent onlookers, and in the center of it all, Evelyn stood still, proud and unshaken. At the edge of a moment the world wouldn't forget, the morning sun gleamed like polished brass, casting long shadows over the runway of the private airstrip. The jet sat waiting, sleek and silent, its silver body reflecting the sky like a mirror. From the distance, a woman appeared. Measured steps, head held high, heels tapping against the concrete like a soft drumbeat of confidence. Her name was Evelyn James. She wore a navy moule suit that hugged her posture with tailored precision. In one hand was a briefcase that gleamed like it had its own ambition. In the other, a small rolling bag that glided behind her like it belonged to royalty. She walked not like someone catching a flight, but like someone preparing to claim a victory. As she neared the steps of the jet, a man in uniform emerged from its shadow. The pilot, tall, neat, his face relaxed, but his eyes spoke of assumptions. "Good morning, ma'am," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his tone. "Are you here on behalf of Mr. Delaney?" There it was, the first crack in the glass. Evelyn stopped mid-step. No furrowed brow, no burst of anger. Only the brief tightening of her jaw, a pause just long enough to be unmistakable. Then, with quiet composure, she looked him in the eye and said, "No, I'm Evelyn James. This is my jet." Silence followed, the kind that stretches time, the kind that reveals everything. The pilot blinked, confused, then skeptical. Why is it, she thought, that certainty in a woman's voice can still be met with doubt? He glanced back at the co-pilot, who stood frozen at the jet door. No one moved. For a moment the scene became a still-life painting of discomfort. Would you have spoken up in that moment? As the sun continued its climb above them, Evelyn didn't back down. She stood there, alone on the tarmac, dignity wrapped around her like armor. Whatever was about to happen next, she was ready for it, because this was no ordinary boarding. It was the beginning of something far deeper. And that's where her real flight began. Evelyn didn't blink. Her words had already echoed in the air. "This is my jet." But the pilot, now visibly uneasy, didn't move to let her pass. "I'm sorry, Miss James," he muttered, voice stiff. "We're having some technical issues. We'll need to delay boarding until further notice." "Technical issues?" She tilted her head slightly, examining him. The jet had just been polished. She had confirmed the flight herself the night before. There had been no mention of delays, no maintenance warnings. Only now, with her standing at the steps. Her voice came calm but sharp. "Funny, when I spoke to your dispatch team yesterday, everything was cleared. No problems. Not a word about technical issues." The pilot glanced over his shoulder again, this time searching for rescue. None came. A few airport staff had paused nearby. A couple passengers at a distance began to watch. Someone lifted a phone slowly, recording discreetly. The tension thickened, like fog rolling in with purpose. Evelyn took a step closer, her heels deliberate, slicing the silence. "Let me ask you," she said, eyes locked on his. "What exactly makes you so sure I couldn't own this jet?" The question, Simple, undeniable, hung in the air like a verdict. The pilot swallowed hard. He stammered. It's not about that. We just need to verify. Verify what? Evelyn's voice never rose. That a black woman can't fly on her own plane? That I must be somebody's assistant? For a moment, his face told the whole story. He wasn't prepared for this. Her clarity, her presence, the truth she represented. And yet she didn't push further. She paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. How many times have you been questioned, not because of your actions, but because of your image? She looked beyond him then, beyond the plane, toward the sky. She had worked too long, fought too hard to have her belonging questioned. This wasn't just about one flight. It was about every locked door she had ever forced open. And she wasn't done yet. The silence on the runway echoed in Evelyn's mind, but her memory drowned it out. She wasn't born into power. Her first office had been a corner of her one-bedroom apartment, a folding table pressed against a window that barely let in light. The walls were thin, the heater unreliable, but her dreams, those burned hotter than any furnace. She had spent nights hunched over a cracked laptop, fingers aching, eyes blurry. While others slept, she coded, wrote business plans, researched investors who rarely returned her calls. During the day, she waited tables, not because she lacked ambition, but because ambition didn't pay rent, not at first. One winter night, after her shift ended, she sat by the window with a stack of unpaid bills and a cold cup of coffee. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from doubt. Maybe they're right, she had whispered. Maybe I don't belong. But just then, her mother's voice came from the kitchen. You do, she said gently, placing a plate of food on the table. You belong anywhere you decide to be. Don't let the world shrink you. That moment stitched itself into Evelyn's soul. It was what she called on whenever someone called her sweetheart in a boardroom or dismissed her resume with a polite smile. Years passed, and with each no, she built a stronger yes. With each slammed door, she carved out her own. Eventually, her tech startup took off, slowly, then suddenly. And one morning, she bought herself a jet. Not for vanity, for victory. Have you ever carried a dream no one else could see? Back on the tarmac, Evelyn blinked away the past. She wasn't just standing in front of a plane. She was standing on the shoulders of every version of herself who had refused to quit. This wasn't just her jet. It was proof. And no one was going to take it from her. The whispers were growing. A small circle had formed, passengers waiting for connecting flights, ground crew with curious glances, and a few already holding up phones like shields, recording history as it unfolded. Evelyn didn't flinch. The pilot's face had shifted from polite resistance to open discomfort. His excuses had begun to unravel. We just want to be thorough, he said, louder this time, casting his voice toward the onlookers as if seeking their agreement. Security matters, especially with private flights. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice low but piercing. Security has nothing to do with this. She held up the leather folder in her hand. Inside it, legal documents, flight records, proof of ownership. She handed them to him, steady, undeniable. If it were a man in my shoes, if it were a white man in my shoes, would we be having this conversation right now? A beat passed. The pilot opened his mouth, closed it. The cameras caught everything. The truth had been said, and once spoken, it cannot be unsaid. What do you feel when someone finally says what's been hiding in plain sight? Evelyn turned slightly, her eyes scanning the crowd. Some nodded, silent allies. Others looked away, uneasy, unwilling to confront the discomfort in themselves. But no one spoke. No one interrupted. A woman near the back, gray-haired and gentle, stepped forward. She touched Evelyn's arm lightly and whispered, "You're doing exactly what needs to be done." Evelyn gave her a small smile. She didn't shout. She didn't demand. She simply stood firm. And in that stillness, she reclaimed every inch of space that had been denied to her. Dignity doesn't need volume. It only needs truth. A new figure emerged from the airport building. Sharp suit, stern eyes, stride full of intent. The airline's executive summoned to the scene arrived with tension rippling behind his every step. The murmurs grew louder. Even the wind seemed to still as he approached Evelyn and the pilot. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice clipped, already weary of the cameras filming from all angles. Before the pilot could speak, Evelyn calmly handed him the folder. "My name is Evelyn James. I own this aircraft. These documents prove it." He flipped through the papers, his brow furrowing, reading, verifying, then looking up at the pilot with a flicker of suspicion. "These are in order," he said plainly. The pilot flushed. "She must have forged them." That sentence fell like a rock into a quiet pond. For a moment, everyone froze, shocked not just by the claim, but by the audacity. Evelyn's gaze sharpened, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. What kind of damage can words do when they're coated in disbelief? The executive turned pale. Without a word, he pulled out his phone and tapped quickly. "Logs, records, internal reports." His eyes scanned faster, his shoulders stiffening. Then he paused. The silence tightened like a noose. He turned to a colleague standing nearby, whispered urgently, showed him something on the screen. The colleague's expression dropped. A history of complaints. A pattern. Incidents swept under the rug. Minorities mistreated. Voices ignored. The pilot, now pale, stared at the ground. The ground, too, seemed ashamed. Finally, the executive turned back to Evelyn. "Ms. James," he said quietly, "you're cleared to board. I'm sorry this happened." But sorry was too late. Evelyn nodded once. No triumph, no anger, only a quiet understanding. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in silence, backed by truth. Have you ever seen someone exposed, not by revenge, but by the weight of their own past? And still, Evelyn stood tall, because this battle had never been about her alone. With her documents returned, and the executive's apology still hanging in the air, Evelyn ascended the aircraft stairs. Each step was measured, deliberate. Her heels struck the metal with calm defiance, echoing through the crowd like a slow drum of justice. Then she paused. At the top of the steps she turned, not toward the plane, but back to the people watching. Her hand gripped the rail, but her voice remained steady, as though speaking from someplace deeper than lungs or throat. "This isn't just about me," she said, eyes sweeping across the faces below. "It's about the next person who gets questioned for looking like me, for daring to succeed." A hush fell over the tarmac. "We're told to stay quiet, to not make trouble. But this," she motioned toward the jet, "this was built through years of rejection, insult, and doubt. I've earned every inch of this moment." Then, softer, almost as if to herself, "We all belong wherever we choose to stand, with dignity, without permission. Would you have spoken if you were in her place?" A woman in the crowd clasped her hands. A man wiped at his eyes. The quiet gave way to a ripple of applause, first hesitant, then growing, until it filled the air with something Evelyn hadn't expected: shared pride. She nodded once, not as a goodbye, but as a vow. Because the fight wasn't over, because someone had to see her rise to believe they could too. Moments like this don't end, they echo. And as she turned and stepped into the cabin, Evelyn James carried not only her own story, but the voices of many who had been silenced too long. Evelyn settled into her seat, the hum of the engine soft beneath her. The cabin was quiet, but her mind was anything but. She let her eyes close for a moment, not from fatigue, but reflection. Outside, the crowd was dispersing. Some walked away changed, others just quieter. But the air still carried the echo of her words, the trace of something that had shifted. As the jet began to move, Evelyn looked out the window. The runway stretched ahead like a clean slate, and then, gently, the wheels lifted. She was airborne. But this wasn't just altitude. This was something greater. Each foot off the ground felt like a mile away from the doubt, the prejudice, the moments she'd been told to sit down, to wait her turn. Now she wasn't waiting, she was leading. Isn't that what freedom feels like? When no one can block your path anymore? She exhaled, slow and sure. Memories returned, not like shadows, but like firelight. The cramped apartment, her mother's steady voice, the sting of being overlooked in meetings, the quiet tears behind closed doors. Every trial had brought her here, not as baggage, but as fuel. The pilot who'd tried to diminish her had been removed, but Evelyn knew it wasn't about him. It was about all the invisible moments that built to this one, and all the women still building theirs. She reached into her bag and pulled out the presentation folder for her next meeting. A global fund for women of color starting businesses. Her fingers traced the edge of the cover, then stilled. "This," she whispered, "is just the beginning." And somewhere over the clouds, Evelyn James smiled. Not because the fight was over, but because she had risen above it. Have you ever looked down at a storm and realized it can't touch you anymore? Sometimes, the world will question your place, not because of what you've done wrong, but because of who you are. And in those moments, you can feel like a stranger in a room you built with your own hands. But as Evelyn James showed us, quiet strength speaks louder than loud resistance. She didn't shout, she didn't plead, she simply stood her ground with truth and grace. There's a lesson in that for all of us, no matter our age. We may not own jets or run companies, but we've all had to prove ourselves in ways others couldn't see. And maybe that's where our real legacy lives. Not in applause, but in the calm courage to say, "I belong here," even when no one else believes it. So today, if you find yourself doubting your worth, remember this: dignity isn't given, it's lived. And every time you rise above ignorance with patience, every time you hold your head high instead of lowering your voice, you remind the world of something it often forgets. Respect is not a favor, it's a right. The plane cut through the sky, leaving no sound but a low, steady hum. And yet, that moment held more power than any crowd could offer. Evelyn sat quietly by the window, not in triumph, but in stillness. A kind of peace that comes after standing firm, a kind of strength that needs no applause. Sometimes, survival itself is a kind of victory. What came next was not loud, but steady, rebuilding trust, reaffirming identity, making sure this story didn't end with one woman, one runway, one refusal. Because the deeper battle, against silence, against forgetting, was just beginning. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. Stories like Evelyn's remind us, justice is not a moment. It's a promise we have to keep making, for ourselves and for those who come after us. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.